seconds. Everyone, please sign in attendance. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't turn the attendance on. My mistake. Yes, I know. I know. I'm sorry. Okay. Now it's running. Sorry. There it is. My apologies. All right. I have 1:30, so I'll get started. Welcome back. When we broke for class about a week and a half ago, I didn't anticipate what would happen. It seems that all too often we have to deal with these sorts of unexpected bad things that happen. In 2017, we had Hurricane Harvey. We were out for nearly 3 weeks. And that was a terrible semester, just the amount of disruption. In fact, the people who graduated this past May in the middle of the pandemic had to deal with a bar was my Harvey class, right? There were 1Ls when Harvey hit. And when they graduated, they had to take the bar during the pandemic for the first time. So that class, the class of 2020, was just one after the other. And so now we have the pandemic. We have this flood. If you need to take a pass today, that's fine. Just tell me. I'll be happy to let you pass. People have a lot going on. And the way these sort of disasters work is the effects are not distributed equally, right? I never lost power by the grace of who knows who, just my power. My lights never turned off. I lost water for a couple of days, but it came back. No burst pipes. A lot of people in this class were not so fortunate. They lost power for days. They may still have power. They might have massive damage from burst pipes. They might have no internet access for some time. So we'll work with you as best as we can. I know the school has like emergency funding and different sources. So if you need, you can talk to me or talk to one of the deans. I'm sure they can put you in touch. But just the amount of chaos we've had just in the last year between the pandemic and a pandemic and everything else has just been really tragic. So I'm here to help. If you want to talk to me in office hours, I'm here after class or whatever else. I need to tweak the syllabus. You should have seen by now the dean sent out an email giving a plan, which I think is actually quite good. I was worried how they'd handle it. I think the plan they came up with is actually like really smart, and it's better than anything I could have come up with. So what they're doing is that for every day of last week, there'll be a Friday that's designated for makeups. So if you put up, go to the syllabus, and I'll put the link over here. Also, I'll do a screen share. I've added 2 days to the syllabus, and I put them in red so you can't miss them. Where are they? So the first makeup date is on Friday, March 5th. It's actually class 13, so it's not quite Friday the 13th, but close enough. Friday, March 5th, meeting at the same time, 1:30. So same time, same Zoom, same everything else. The second makeup class will be on another Friday. It's on, where is it? There it is. It's on April 9th. Friday, April 9th. So there'll be 2 weeks where we have 3 classes per week. I think it's a very reasonable way the school did it. I'm actually pleased with what they came up with. So good. If you have any objections, if you can't make it, that's fine. I won't be taking attendance, but they'll be recorded. And please watch it, because you need to know this stuff. It's on the exam, and you'll need to know otherwise. While I have the syllabus up, your spring break is on March 15th. What I'm going to try to do is, when you guys get back from spring break, I'm going to try to have a sample midterm to give you. I'm not going to grade it. It'll be on your own, but a couple of you asked me about it, and that'll be something you could take on your own to sort of see where you are. I'm happy to go over it during office hours, or I'll maybe talk about it in class, but I'm going to try and get that for you when we come back from spring break. And I think that's about roughly halfway point of the semester, so you can give yourself a reality check. My My property students are actually getting their midterms right before spring break, so that'll be my spring break, just grading midterms and writing new ones. So that's my plan. Okie doke. Any questions on timing, on scheduling, on storms, on COVID, on anything else in your mind? Anything you want to talk about? No? I see no hands. All right, I will then move on to today's material. I know class was a long time ago, so it may not be fresh what we covered last, but our last topic was freedom of the press. And we discussed two different types of laws that burden the press. The first two cases involve laws of general applicability, which means laws that applied generally to everyone, like the laws of contract or the laws of grand jury subpoenas, right? Everyone's bound by them. These are not laws that were enacted to target the press. There were other types of press regulations that did target the press. So we had the Fairness Doctrine, which required a right of reply. They had to, post or broadcast on your program the other point of view. That was in Red Lion. And then we had the right of reply in the Terminello case from Florida with Miami Herald, that you had to publish an op-ed or publish an editorial that gave a response, right? If you criticize a politician, you had to let the politician respond in the same format. Those were not laws of general applicability. They targeted the press directly. Today we're talking about a different type of regulation, right? We have these sorts of laws that directly regulated the content of speech. And then we had laws that sort of did target the content of the freedom of speech. Today we have what are called content neutral regulations. That is, regulations that don't regulate the content of speech, but regulations that regulate the time, the place, and the manner of speech. Time, place, and manner. Time, that is when you're speaking. Place, that is where you're speaking. And the manner, which means how you're speaking. The regulations that we're doing in our first case, we'll get to the obscenity stuff later. That's much more fun, right? But in the first case, we're talking about a content neutral regulation of the time, place, and manner. Right? Okie doke. Where am I on my lovely long list of 95 people?
Right here.
Who's that? Oh, Justin. Okay, I see you, Justin. Thank you, sir. All right, Justin. So let's start with the first case. Ward versus Rock against racism. Right? Great case name. I actually love the name of this case. Right? Give me the facts here, Justin.
Okay. So, because we can have. So hopefully I remember them all. But basically, there's
okay. I appreciate your honesty, by the way. I do appreciate your candor. But so go for it. It's funny. I was prepping for class the Sunday before. I'm like, there's no way we're having class, but I still prepared. I was like, might happen. And then the dean sent a message at 7:30. It's like, oh well. All right, so go on, do your best.
You're gonna get caught off guard on that one. So there's a bandstand in Central Park, and it's right next to a bunch of apartment buildings, and it overlooks a field in the park. And I believe there was a regulation about how loud and when you could perform there, or play music there. Mm-hmm. And RAR brought a suit saying that was a violation of their free speech.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Justin. Very good. All right. So I don't know if any of you have ever actually been to Central Park or you've ever been to New York City. It's a huge park, right? It basically sits in the middle of Manhattan, and it goes for like maybe 60 blocks. It's just a ginormous park. Think Discovery Green times like 100, right? It's huge. And there are many sections of Central Park, right? There are lakes, there are baseball fields, right? There's a zoo in Central Park. They have an entire zoo in there. And it just kind of goes on forever. Part of the Central Park is a theater, what they call a bandstand or a clamshell. It's basically just like an amphitheater where there's open seating around it. And this amphitheater is near a place called the Meadow, which is sort of like this place where people can go. There are no sheep there. It's called the Sheep Meadow. There are no sheep in New York. That's not. Maybe at one time there was. There are no sheep there, but it's a place you can go where it's quiet, it's serene, it's peaceful. People can go and sit in their park and do whatever you do in a park. It's also near residences on a street called Central Park West. That name might not mean much to you, but it's a very expensive place to live, right? These are, like the wealthiest people in the city live across from the view from the park, right? If you have a view of Central Park, it means you've made it, right? So these are very wealthy people we're talking about. And New York City allows people to hold concerts and different performances in this theater, but they have some restrictions. Specifically, they restrict sound. Okay, how do they restrict sound? They say you have to use the city's equipment, right? The city's speakers. You can't bring your own speakers. And you must employ a city sound technician, right? Okay, so that was Justin. Who's next? Okay, Kinza, is that you?
Yes.
Okay, hi Kinza, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So let's just be very clear. Did the city put any restrictions on what the band and the rock bands could say?
No.
Did they restrict what kind of songs they could sing?
No, I think it was just the volume.
All right, so let me just ask you a sort of a stupid question, but it's important, Kinza. Why is rock music speech for the First Amendment? We're not talking about, we're not talking about political speech. We're not talking about criticizing politicians. We're talking about rock music, right? How is rock music speech?
Well, you can convey ideas through lyrics.
How?
I'm trying to think of examples, but I can't think of any. I know that there were a lot of rock music back in the day against like war.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, very good. So, yeah, thanks, Kinsey. That's very good. So, look, if I go up and I start saying that, war is bad, racism is bad, whatever message I have, we all agree that's speech. If I do it while some guy's playing a guitar, it's still speech. In other words, speech doesn't lose its protected value when there's music behind it. In fact, some people would say that music makes speech even more effective because people can sing along. They remember the tunes, right? You listen on the radio to music that has a message, and it gets you, right? If a really good song that can connect to you in ways that just a spoken word cannot. And maybe you're a music fan, maybe you're not. I don't really care, but at least most people agree that music has a value to convey information that just speaking doesn't. This organization, RAR, was called Rock Against Racism. And they came to this location to put on a rock concert to oppose racism. Okay, that's their message. Now, I think, Blake, are you next? So, Blake, let's just try and review a bit because a lot of people ask me this question. In the past, we talked about viewpoint discrimination and content discrimination, right? Remember we talked about those topics last week or 2 weeks ago? Give me an example in this case of what a viewpoint discrimination would be.
A viewpoint discrimination would be if the city was to not let RAR use the facility to show off their views.
Okay. But
of being anti-racist.
Right. So for example, what would be a viewpoint discrimination if they allowed someone else to speak? Just, what would happen?
I'm not sure that I'm understanding what you're
Okay,
getting
so
at.
imagine that the KKK wants to put in a concert saying racism's great, right? And New York says, sure, come on by, right? Have the stage. And then Rock Against Racism says, we want to have a speech opposing racism. They say, sorry, we don't like that perspective. What would you have there?
You'd have a clear viewpoint discrimination issue.
Okay, good. Thanks, Blake. Right. Okay, so a viewpoint discrimination is when the government picks a side in a debate. They allow perspective A, but not perspective B. They can say we're okay with racist speech, but we don't want anti-racist speech, whatever phrase you want to use. By the way that anti-racism is used today is not how it was used in this case from nearly 30 years ago. So I just want to make sure the terminology is straight. The phrase anti-racist has a different meaning today than it did in this case. But you can imagine Rock Against Racism versus Rock for Racism, right? If they allowed one side, not the other, that would be a viewpoint discrimination. All right, Garrett, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Garrett, let me ask you a question. What if New York had a law that said, we don't want people talking about racism, right? It's just too dicey, too risky. You can't speak in favor of it. You can't speak in favor of it. You can't speak against it. Just, we will not grant any permits to use this concert hall, this theater, for talking about racism. What would you have there? What kind of restriction would that be?
It'd be content.
Content-based. Why is it a content-based restriction?
Because you're not edging out any particular views. You're just pretty blanketed. You're not allowed to talk about this and that's that, no matter for or against.
Okay. Can the government impose a content-based restriction?
I want to say no.
Why not?
Because I feel like that would be against your First Amendment to exercise your opinion about a certain subject, I guess.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Garrett. All right. Generally, content-based restrictions are unconstitutional, right? It's going to be very rare where the government can actually impose a content-based restriction. Likewise, viewpoint-based restrictions are unconstitutional, almost always, right? If the government says we're picking a side in this debate, right? Or picking a side in this debate, you can have the KKK, but not the Rock Against Racism. You can't do that. Does everyone get the difference between the content-based and the viewpoint-based restrictions?
Professor, did you say content-based restrictions were unconstitutional?
Almost always, Joe. Almost always. I mean, I'm sure you can find a rare case, but it's almost always going to be invalid. Oh, who's that?
That was Marcus. Joe is like my big brother. But,
oh no, you guys are both.
A little different.
See, the problem is both you guys are off mute, and I can't see you speaking.
No problem.
Okay, so who's that?
That's Marcus.
Okay, there we go. All right, you guys got to raise your hands when you go up, because if you don't raise your hands, I can't see you speaking.
I apologize. I'm using my phone. And
That's okay. That's all right. That's all right. All right, Joe, you're off mute as well. Do you have a question?
No, I'm fine, Professor.
Okay, thank you. All right. My apologies. With content-based and viewpoint-based descriptions, all right, it's generally going to be unconstitutional. All right. But the case today does not impose a viewpoint discrimination. The city grants permits to people of a wide range of opinions. And it's not a content-based restriction. The city grants permits to a wide range of topics. You can put on Shakespeare in the Park. You can put on a performance of a play, whatever you want. Instead, it's a content-neutral regulation. Content-neutral regulation. Everyone see the difference, right? The example I gave before was content-based. This is the opposite, content-neutral. When the government imposes a content-neutral restriction, the government gets a lot more discretion, right? Why? Who's next? Oh, Jenny, are you here? I think you wanted to pass, right?
Yeah, pass, please.
Okay, that's right. You emailed me. Greg, you here?
I'm here.
Greg, why are the courts less skeptical of a content neutral regulation? Why are content neutral regulations not so bad?
Because you're not necessarily prohibiting it's an idea. I don't know. It's
Why is a content neutral regulation less bad?
I don't got an answer. It's fair. I mean, it's not. I don't know. Can't muster up an answer.
Lexus, you here?
Yes, sir.
Why are courts less skeptical of content neutral regulations?
Because content neutral regulations aren't like discriminating what the message is conveying. It's more regulating what the surroundings, like what you said in the beginning, the time.
That's it.
The place and manner.
Okay, say those three things again.
Time, place, and manner.
Okay, time, place, and manner. You can remember the TPM if you want to remember it. That's how I remember it. Time, place, and manner. Thanks, Lexus. Okay, so with a content neutral regulation, the government's not regulating the content of your speech, and they're not restricting what viewpoints you can hold on that content. Instead, they're restricting when you can speak, where you can speak, and the manner, how you can speak. We'll get to the manner one in a minute. That's the trickiest one. But we all agree that time restrictions make sense, right? If you want to have a rock concert, you probably shouldn't have it at 4 o'clock in the morning when people are sleeping. I think we'd all agree on that. That makes sense? Okay. If you want to have a parade, you might want to have it down Main Street or down, Broadway, but you can't have it at 9 a.m. during rush hour. Maybe you should have it on a weekend when it's not so trafficy, right? So you can see how regulating the time and the place of speech is very important, right? You don't want to have something loud to disrupt people. But look, we say, if you want a parade, you can have it on Main Street at 9 a.m. on Sunday when there's no traffic, like the rodeo parade, right? If you imagine having the rodeo parade during rush hour, it'd be a disaster. So you have it down Main Street at 9 a.m. on a Sunday when it won't cause much of a disruption to commerce. Then there's this last one. Joseph, you here? Joseph S?
I am. I'm here.
Oh, wait, there you are. Yep. Hi, Joe. Joe, so let me ask this question. What about manner? The third one. Can restricting the manner of speech affect the content of what you're saying?
I think it can. I mean, I think the delivery sometimes is everything. If you've got somebody that's maybe doing it very demonstratively and animated, kind of to rile people up, I think the manner can have a distinct impact on how the listeners react to what's being said.
All right.
So rather, if you let somebody, do something with a mega kind of different, kind of visual things that, portray actions you may want this crowd to take by what you're saying, I think it can definitely have it make a difference.
All right, Joe, let me ask you a follow-up question if I can. And sorry, I didn't see your camera was on before, which is why I got a little tripped up with the names. I'm sorry. Just
no worries.
because I heard a voice and you were off mute. Let me ask this question, Joe, to follow up. Volume, right? This is a rock concert. How does volume, restrictions on how loud the music is, how does volume affect the message, affect the content?
I think tremendously. In the African American church, whenever the pastor wants to get the message across, when it's time to give the money, you always notice that the music gets a little bit louder.
Is that right?
The bass drum is a little bit harder. and it's this kind of theatrical part of this of the ceremony sometimes, and it invokes emotions inside of you. You know, and if it's just a boring, okay, now it's time to get out the collection plate, and you know, you kind of like, oh, okay, I don't feel anything. You know, so I think it can invoke emotions, the volume for sure.
So let me just give you one follow up. In this case, the concert was required to have a city sound tech, sound technician, right? So you can imagine they get to the most emotional part of the concert, right? And they're like going, all right, blast it. And the guy's going, sorry, I got to just dial it down a couple notches, right? How would that affect the message?
It pretty much makes it suck. You know, the guy that, yeah, you can kind of tell from like the city sound guy is horrible. I mean, he probably is a good dude, but he works for the man. You know what I mean? He's not gonna play. You know, he's not gonna play that part of the song the way it's supposed to be played.
I like it. He works for the man. Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks for that. All right, so I think we're close. I think now we get the general gist, right? The concert, the Rock Against Racism, came to the court and they said, okay, we agree. We're not complaining about the time and the place, right? We agree. We're gonna have our concert, on a weekend in the middle of the day. We're not gonna wake people up at night. They're sleeping, but we want to be able to rock out, right? We want to be able to blast our music when we want at the right moment, to rock as hard as we can. Okay. The lower court rules in favor of the concert, right? The lower court rules in favor of the concert. Lauren, you here?
Yes, I'm here.
How does the lower court rule? The court discusses it. It's a bit of a sticky point. Do you have in your notes? How did the lower court rule in this case?
It said that they sustained the noise control measures and that the Court of Appeals reversed that.
Okay, so the district court upheld the measure and the Court of Appeals reversed. Why did the Court of Appeals reverse? The Justice Kennedy, by the way, if you had me for common law, you know how much I dislike Justice Kennedy opinions because you're incoherent. The man was not capable of writing a normal opinion. He was utterly incapable of writing normal sentences. It's his way of thinking. If I write something very vague, people won't know exactly what I'm saying, and that way people can interpret it differently. It's lovely. This was his jurisprudence, which just drives me nuts. I am so thankful he's off the court. Just deeply grateful. There are no more Kennedy opinions. There's no more. We're done. There never again will have a new Kennedy opinion, which is a good thing. But he explains, Lauren, why the lower court screwed up. Why does Justice Kennedy think the lower court messed up?
Well, I talked about under Section B on the other page, it said that they erred in basically saying that the means were not narrowly tailored enough to their objective. Okay, very good. Exactly what I'm looking for. All right. The court gives a 3-factor test. Okay. Wait a minute, Josh. Don't we already have the O'Brien test? I'll get to O'Brien in a minute, I promise. But the court gives a 3-factor test. And these are 3 factors for content neutral restrictions. Okay. When the government is just regulating the time, place, and manner of speech, this is a 3-factor test. All right, so number 1. The rule can be justified without reference to the content of the regulated speech. Right? That's what I'm talking about. When there's a content neutral regulation. Okay, so first, it's without regard to the content of the speech. The second factor, that the regulations are narrowly tailored to serve a significant governmental interest. Narrowly tailored to serve a significant governmental interest. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's very similar to the strict scrutiny analysis you covered last semester in common law, or whenever you took common law, right? I'll come back to narrow tailoring in a minute. The third factor is it leaves open alternate channels to communicate the information. All right. So the first and the third one are very easy here, right? Number 1,
this is a law that applies to everyone putting on a concert, right? There's no restriction about what do you call it? There's no restriction about only certain types of speeches have sound tech. Everyone's to hire the sound tech, right? And the third one is easy to satisfy. Of course, you can put on a concert somewhere else, right? You don't have to put on a concert in New York. You can put a concert somewhere else. You don't have to use Central Park. You could go rent Madison Square Garden, right? You can put on a concert anywhere. The second one is the hardest. That's why it takes up almost the entirety of the case. What does narrow tailoring mean? I'll use the analogy I used in common law. If this is familiar, you can just stop listening, but I'll give it again. Imagine you buy a suit, right? You buy a suit off the rack at, Walmart. It might be a nice suit, but it may not fit you very well, right? For example, one of my arms is slightly longer than the other. You would never notice it, but it's true. So if my arms dangle out, the sleeves don't look quite right. So when I get a suit off the rack, it won't fit my arms right. Right? That suit is not narrowly tailored. It doesn't fit me, right? It does the job, right? It covers my torso, but it's not narrowly tailored. All right, let's say I go to an Italian dress shop and they measure me and they cut a custom suit that fits perfectly, right? There's no excess fabric, right? There's no wasted fabric. That's a suit that's narrowly tailored. When you think of strict scrutiny, you have to basically say, are you a Walmart suit or are you an Italian dress shop suit, right? Are you, roughly tailored, loose fit, or are you narrowly tailored? And the trick is, which suit is wasting more fabric? Well, the Walmart suit, right? Because it's sort of just hanging off. It doesn't really fit me well. Versus the Italian dress suit is fitting me perfectly. You use only the amount of fabric you need, not a single inch more. Okay. Was this regulation narrowly tailored? The court says yes. Right? The interest here is sound, not having a lot of noise. Right? Peace and quiet, serenity. Justice Kennedy loved peace and quiet. Was this regulation serving a significant interest? Yeah, peace and quiet. And was it narrowly tailored? Yes. Right? The city says we're worried if people bring their own sound equipment and those sound techs are going to become too loud. So they use our equipment, which has a maximum level volume, and our guys there. What do you call him, Joe? Sticking to the man, right? So you have the man there to keep an eye on your concert to make sure you don't get too loud. And the court says basically that's a reasonable way of running a concert. Okay? Therefore, it's narrowly tailored. Now, the lower court went the other way. And I want to just mention this for a bit. The lower court said, well, perhaps they could have done this a different way. Right? Maybe the government could have said, we require you to promise not to go above a certain level of decibels, but you can have your own sound tech guy, right? You don't have to have our guy there. Right? As long as you promise not to go above a certain level of decibels, you're fine. Would that have accomplished the government's interest? Yeah. Would that have been more narrowly tailored? Yeah. In fact, that's precisely the problem, right? It's when volume gets above a certain level, that's when there's a problem. So they tell the concert, you cannot go above a certain level of decibels. You can have your own sound people there to mix your own audio, right? So go high and low whenever you want to go. When that collection plate comes out, you're giving the volume, right? But can the court do that, right? Can the court say, you know what, you did X, but you could have done Y. And the fact that you didn't do Y means this is not narrowly tailored, right? Everyone understand that analysis. The court rejects that analysis, the Court of Appeals. They say that's not what we're supposed to do. You're not supposed to see if they pick the most narrowly tailored way, right? The most narrowly tailored option. That's not what the court's about. Instead, the court says, we just decide, is it narrowly tailored? The other test from the Court of Appeals, and write this down, this is important, is called the least restrictive means test. The least restrictive means. In other words, what is the most narrowly tailored way you could have accomplished this goal? And if you picked anything else, the law is unconstitutional, right? That's not the court's test. It's not what is the most narrowly tailored test possible, the most least restrictive means possible. Is it narrowly tailored? So it's strict scrutiny, but not super duper strict scrutiny, right? The government has some latitude. And here, there's narrow tailoring. Everyone get the holding in this case.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead. Who is this? Just please, when you raise your hands, you have to raise your hand on the app because I just hear a voice. I can't see 90 people on a grid, so I just hear a voice floating in the air, and I don't know who it is. So this is why it's tricky. Okay, Tori, go ahead. Yeah, when you raise your hand, it makes my life a lot easier.
Got it. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So the least restrictive means test, is that good for anything?
Yeah, it is. It'll come back in religion. So when we do the free exercise of religion, it will come back, and the court will say it's wrong there also. So what you'll find is that in the 70s and the 60s, the court favored the sort of least restrictive means test, and the 80s and the 90s, the court pushes away against it. So you need to know it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just with 90 students, I can't see who's speaking. So just if you want to raise your hand when you jump up, that makes my life easier. Thank you for that. Okay, thanks, Tori. Yeah, I wish there was a cap on Zoom classes. Just it's tricky, but we're doing the best we can. All right. So questions on this case so far. Okay, so now what about O'Brien, right? The court basically says that this three-factor test from the Ward test is basically the same thing as O'Brien. I'm not sure that's right. I think this case puts a little bit of a chink in the armor of O'Brien. It's not overruling it by any means, but I think these definitely are in tension. If you remember, there was 4 factors, the O'Brien test. I'll just give them to you for your notes so it's complete. Is there regulation within the government's power? Does it further an important and substantial government interest? Is a government interest unrelated to the suppression of free speech? So far, those 3 are very similar to the factors that we have today. But the 4th factor sounds a lot like the least restrictive means test. The 4th factor is if the incidental restriction on freedom is no greater than is essential to the furtherance of that interest. That the restriction is no greater than is essential. That sounds a lot like the least restrictive means test in my mind. And that's what the lower court did. And the court said no. So my gross summary for you is if you have a case involving some sort of symbolic speech, like burning something, and they're banning the burning of it, you probably use the O'Brien test. If it's a content-neutral time, place, and manner restriction, you probably are going to use the Ward versus Rockin's racism test. You're going to hate me. There's so many stupid tests in this semester, and they all conflict, right? The court makes no effort to reconcile their precedents in this area. It's like, oh yeah, whatever, it's the same thing. But then a couple years later, in RAV versus St. Paul, the cross-burning case, they applied the O'Brien test again, but they didn't apply this test because it wasn't content neutral. I know that's not satisfying, but that's what we have. All right. So keep those straight. If it's a content neutral regulation, apply the test from Rocky against racism. And if it's a restriction on some sort of symbolic speech, you probably have to use the O'Brien test. That's the best I can give you. I was beating my head up with this, I guess, last week when I was prepping for class, and that's the best I can come up with. Okay. Any questions on Ward? Questions on Ward? All right, we have about 10 minutes left. I think I can at least start Stanley. I think I can finish it also. Let me lecture a bit to make sure we finish on time. In previous cases, we're dealing with the rights of the speaker, right? A person who's speaking or printing a pamphlet or burning a flag or protesting a funeral or putting on a concert, right? We always thought of the right of the speaker, but Stanley's different. Stanley wasn't the speaker. He was the person receiving the information, or more precisely, the person watching a film strip of pornography. All right. So a little background in this case. This should not have been a First Amendment case. It was actually a Fourth Amendment case. The warrant was to investigate gambling. The cops went to the house. They found no evidence of gambling, but they found 3 reels of film, 8mm film. If you haven't taken Crimpro yet, you'll know this. If you have a warrant for gambling materials, that warrant does not allow them to seize pornography films. You guys know this from Crimpro, right? So there were 3 justices concurred saying this is a Fourth Amendment case. But this is the warrant court. They didn't really care about laws. Like, whatever, we want to reach this result. They reached it. So you have this majority opinion on the First Amendment in a case that should have never gone forward. It should have been the Fourth Amendment, right? This is maddening. And in fact, if you remember the case Mapp versus Ohio, right? Dollery Mapp, right? That was also a case that should have been at the First Amendment, right? But instead it was the Fourth Amendment. It was about a seizure case and the exclusionary rule. So the court just made stuff up in this decade, whatever, but this is what we have. The police go in there with their warrant for gambling materials, and they find these film strips. Now, usually, if you find a film strip and you're a cop, you might bring it back to the station. What did they do? They watched it for 50 minutes. What the hell? I teach this case. I mean, like, really, are these cops that busy that they can sit there in front of a black and white projector watching an hour of porn? I mean, just that's what they were doing, right? I guess that's how they passed their time in the 60s. They had to be thorough. Yeah, I hope so. Funny, true story. The Supreme Court actually had a movie theater. Now it's a museum room, but it used to be a movie theater. And whenever there was an obscenity case, the justices would actually watch the movie. Can you imagine? They would watch the movie to see how bad it was, see if it was obscene. You know the expression, you know it when you see it? That's from Justice Potter Stewart. Yeah, he would actually watch it and decide. That's what that meant. Justice Harlan was basically blind. He would just sit there. He would listen, I suppose. Justice Hugo Black was a First Amendment absolutist. He thought all these speech laws were unconstitutional. He wouldn't even watch it. He's like, doesn't matter. It's protected speech position. Okay. So you have a majority opinion. Justice Marshall wrote it. And again, they skip over the Fourth Amendment issue and they go to the First Amendment. And there's a threshold question. Does the First Amendment protect the right, not just of the speaker, that is the actors in the movie, but also the receiver, that is the person watching the film? And the First Amendment says the Constitution protects the right to receive information and ideas. The Constitution protects the right to receive information and ideas. And what case do they cite there? They cite Griswold and Pierce v. Society of Sisters. Now, those were substantive due process cases, but they were also about the penumbra, if that rings a bell, right? What was actually issued in Griswold is receiving medical advice of how to use contraception. And what was it issued in Pierce? Nuns teaching kids about knowledge. And the court says that the First Amendment protects not just the right to speak, but also the right to receive information. And that applies regardless of its social worth. Now, here's the rub of this case. The court says that you can criminalize the sale of pornography and obscenity, but you can't ban its possession in the home. Just pause for a second. Can you imagine the court says, well, look, you can ban the sale of crack or meth, right? But if you have it in your house, you're good. You're free and clear, right? It's such a weird holding, and I don't want you to take it too seriously because other cases put more rigor on this. What the court's saying is that when you're in your home, you have privacy, and this privacy is from unwanted governmental intrusion. Now, wouldn't it have been better for the court to say, come on, the government can't ban pornography, right? The government can't ban the sale of pornography. That's ridiculous. But there weren't enough votes for that. So instead, they have this sort of very strange opinion that says you have a right to be free from unwanted governmental intrusion in the privacy of your home. Now, what if Stanley brought this information outside of his home into his backyard or carried it downtown in a magazine he was reading on a bus? Well, in that case, you can be arrested, but not in your home, which is why this was a Fourth Amendment case at every juncture, right? In your home, it's your castle, as the law says, and you have certain rights in your home. Is watching a movie the same thing as giving a speech? I mean, really, just think about it. You're sitting there, you're watching a film strip. I mean, maybe I'm going to stop. I'm not going to say anything else, but you're just watching the film strip. You're just watching the film strip. I'm going to get myself in trouble. I already got in trouble once today. I'm not going to get in trouble again. But just watching the film strip is speech. And the court writes, this is a very famous sentence. He says, if the First Amendment means anything, it means that a state has no business. Thanks. Marcus is trying to get me in trouble. Not going to happen, friend. If the First Amendment means anything, it means that a state has no business telling a man sitting alone in his house what books he may read or films he may watch. Again, books. Remember Citizens United about banning books? That's like the slippery slope. You cannot ban books. Well, if you can ban movies, why can't you ban books? You see how they're sort of using the book analogy to sort of help with the film strip analogy, right? Again, they can criminalize distribution, but they can't criminalize possession. All right. Now, they didn't describe the content of these movies quite deliberately, but these were allegedly obscenity. And I want you to draw a line in your notes between pornography and obscenity. Pornography is permissible, right? It's protected speech. Obscenity is not. Obscenity is unprotected speech. Obscenity is in the same category as defamation or libel. Obscenity is in the same category as fighting words. Obscenity is not protected. Now, this case doesn't even begin to explain what is obscenity. We'll do that in our cases next week, or I guess on Wednesday. You might ask, Josh, so where do you draw the line between pornography and obscenity? Oh, God, I'm going to be in big trouble on Wednesday. There are tests we'll study. The tests are not very good. The modern answer is that we are so depraved. We are so effed up as a society. We can't even define what obscenity anymore is. Well, Lewis says, you know, when you see it, that's actually one of the opinions from Justice Stewart, which is not very helpful because everyone sees things differently, right? You see one thing, I see another. But we are such a morally coarse society that I don't even know what obscenity would even be anymore, right? There's not been a successful obscenity prosecution in many years because we have such different conceptions of where the line is. And my God, friends, the internet has just ruined everything. Just anything you want to Google, it's there. Everything is there. So the idea that we can actually police obscenity is I think, a thing of the past. But I think what's important about the Stanley case is this key point that the First Amendment is not just about speaking, but also receiving. And let me flip it, make the case make more sense. Imagine a law that says you can speak to whoever you want, but they can't hear you, right? You're not allowed to assemble with more than 5 people in a room, right? It sounds like a COVID law, right? You can speak to yourself, but you can't have an assembly of more than 5 people, right? The people in the room have a right to hear the information just as much as a person has a right to speak. This is why when you protest, when you disrupt a person, when you try and shout them down, you're not only disrupting the rights of the speaker, you're also interfering with the rights of the people that are listening, right? If I'm trying to give a speech and you're giving your bullhorn, you're making all this noise, there are people around me who want to hear it, right? If someone came to the Zoom classroom and started yelling at me, there are 89 other people who would be disrupted. So the key point of this case isn't really even about obscenity. It's sort of floating in the background. But it's that this First Amendment applies to both the right to speak and the right to be heard. It's a two-way street. All right. Questions on Stanley v. Georgia? Sorry, that's a lecture. This is our world with this semester. Questions on Stanley? Very important case, but just it's a weird case because it was litigated below as a Fourth Amendment case. I'm like, yep, never mind. We won't talk about it. We'll talk about the First Amendment instead. It was a very strange case. No questions? None? All right. The minute poll is running. Let me wrap up a bit. The first case, Ward versus Rock Against Racism, is an important case to discuss the different types of discrimination. We've talked about viewpoint, we've talked about content, now we have content neutral, right? Generally, viewpoint and content-based restrictions are invalid. The court's not going to uphold them. But the court will uphold a content neutral regulation so long as it's narrowly tailored. And this one was. Narrow tailoring doesn't have to mean the least restrictive means or the most narrowly tailored approach. The court gives some flexibility to this question. Our second case, Stanley, establishes an important rule that you have a right to receive information and people have a privacy in the right of their own home, which really is a Fourth Amendment issue more than a First Amendment issue, but this is a world we have. Yes, Krista, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I have a question back on Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
So I have written down that this was an obscenity case, but you said obscenity is not protected, pornography is. So is this really a pornography case?
The court doesn't say. The court doesn't say. The court begins. Right. That's why it's a frustrating case. They don't actually discuss the material, whether it's obscene. Right? Okay. All the court basically says is it doesn't even matter if it's obscene. Let's just assume it's obscene for present purposes because it's in the home. They can't prosecute you for it.
So pornography and obscenity would be protected, but you'd have to take the obscenity out of the house before it would not be protected.
I think that's probably right. Yeah. In other words, you can't have obscenity unless it's in your home. Then you can have it. So in other words, you could prosecute someone for distributing obscenity, but you can't ban someone possessing obscenity in their home. But if they remove it from their home, my goodness, then you can nail them. Or something like that. It's a very weird case. I can see you're just sort of a little uncertain. We'll talk in class on Wednesday about what it actually means to be obscene, right? There are tests, and we'll talk about those tests. One is Miller versus California, and the other one's Ashcroft versus free speech. We'll talk about these cases, but this case isn't even about what is obscene. It's just sort of, it doesn't fit anywhere. Okay, thanks, Krista, though. All right, anything else, guys? Oh, I'm getting in big trouble Wednesday. This is going to be a fun semester. All right, I'll see you guys later. Thank you.